Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Sarah.
Hey, Anne.
How are you?
I am, let's see, where I am right now. Kamala spoke at the convention last night. Did you get to listen?
I have not listened. I just have so much more hope than I had a few weeks ago.
You know, I'll tell you, I'm going to be really honest about where I am with all of this because I think it's very complicated. So, in order to not go into the depth of despair, I had to tell myself that Trump was going to win and that he had to win because democracy needed to be destroyed so that we could rebuild. That's the story that I had to tell myself.
I remember you telling me that because then it threw me into existential dread and I told you we couldn't talk about this anymore.
So that's where I was. And I've been listening, of course, always listening to like the astrology and kind of like, you know, because there's a big part of me that wants to be able to predict what's going to happen so that I can feel okay, you know? And so astrologers are like, yeah, all this crazy shit is going to happen and yada, yada, yada. And I was, after the debate with Joe Biden, I was definitely like, he needs to step down. He's going to step down. I did predict that. But I didn't think Kamala was the one who was going to be put forward. I thought there was going to be a fight. I thought the DNC was going to be a disaster. I'm watching all my people talk about how Palestinians are still not being supported in any way, shape, or form. And I feel hope and I feel critical because I don't necessarily think that Kamala is actually any different than Joe Biden. Maybe a little bit, but I was listening to her speech last night and there was one part of me that was like, yeah. And then there was this other part of me that's like, I've heard this my whole adult life and what has actually changed. And I'm just starting to feel like the president doesn't have that much power, especially when we're looking at the Supreme Court stacked the way that it is and with, you know, Congress the way that it is. I loved Tim Walz. I want him to be my dad. Yeah.
It is so restorative.
Yeah.
He's the dad we all wish we had.
Yeah, exactly. So those are the things that bring me hope. It would be nice to have like really nice people in the White House again. And Joe Biden, I think, is nice, but like old. And I just think we need something new, like new has to happen. Not just nice, not just hope. Something new, something revolutionary, something shifting. And maybe it shifts more slowly than I have thought in my head that it's going to shift, but that's why I feel conflict. And I know a lot of people are probably going to be super pissed that I'm just not just like, rah, rah, Kamala's amazing. It's just, I am of many minds at the same time. It's really hard.
Do you know, the thing is she my favorite ever? No. Is she currently the best option I have? Yes. And is she going to represent like visibility for a lot of people?
Yeah.
And yes. Right. And do I agree with everything?
Right.
No. Like, just because she's not Joe Biden and because she's the Democratic nominee doesn't mean we have to agree with everything she says. I think it just means at least we have a better option than we did before.
Right. And
I'm okay with that.
But that part is what I think makes me sad, is that how many of us are just saying like, oh, thank God it's not Joe Biden, you know, and we're excited because of that. That's problematic. That's not great. I'm going to vote for her, guys. Like, don't worry. Like, obviously, I'm going to vote for her. But I want to be having more complex conversations about this than I'm hearing political pundits talk about.
Fair. What do I feel about that? I am excited to vote for a woman.
Same.
I am excited to vote for someone who's not Joe Biden. I agree that that's a problematic stance to have to take. And I am exhausted of complex conversations around this.
What a 7. That's such a 7 response.
It can't, in the same way that I say to my clients, we can't always talk about the shit. Sometimes we have to like talk about the fun stuff.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at with this.
Yeah, that's
like,
totally fair too.
I recognize that she is not perfect, that I don't agree with her, that there are a lot more complexities that we could and probably should be talking about. But right now, I'm complexed out. That's where I'm at with this. I get to vote for a woman of color for president, and I'm real excited about that. So that's and I'm going to be in Chicago when it happens.
You get to vote in Chicago?
I will be in those United States on election day for the first time since Obama.
Oh, wow.
I suppose. Yeah. The last one I was here in England. And then when Donald Trump got elected, I was in Russia.
Yes. Wow.
Which was a journey, which we could talk about for hours, but we won't. That was funny. So if you like voting, why not vote for your favorite podcast by rating and reviewing us? How was that?
That was very good.
You can go to ratethispodcast.com/wounded healer. I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
You can buy merch from our merch store, which is tinyurl.com/CWH merch. You can tell your friends about us, which is great. And you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/convos-with-a-wounded-healer. Sarah, what did you think about my conversation with Charlotte?
I loved it. I really, really loved it. And something came up for me that I also thought was really important to talk about. We're in an age right now where it feels, and maybe this always happens. Maybe I'm just like at the generational place where I'm like, kids today, right? And I just start thinking about all the ways that it seems like things have changed. But what I notice is that the world has changed really fast. And I notice younger therapists assuming that they know more about the way the world works than people who've come before them. Because there are new things now that, maybe we didn't, I know we didn't talk about 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago plus. But when we forget the wisdom of experience, there is so much lost. And so when I was hearing you talk with Charlotte, I was just like, this is elder wisdom, right? This is wisdom of somebody who's been around the block for a while, who's seen a little bit of everything. You guys didn't go in depth, about anything that's like, particularly a hot topic for today, like racism and yada, yada. But whether or not that's what she goes into, it doesn't matter. Like, we can take wisdom from people who have done this work, regardless of how woke somebody is. And I don't know. I don't know why I'm feeling a little defensive, maybe for myself. Maybe that's why I'm feeling this a little bit right now. Not that anybody's even come at me. It's just, I just feel like I'm watching things happen and I'm like, but you guys, there's so much brilliance that we miss when we're like, oh, this person said this one thing in 2011, and so we can't listen to them anymore.
It's funny because I've been thinking about like general kind of cancel culture stuff. And like, I've been having conversations with, people who've been in the industry for a long time recently. And I think one of the things that I think about, and one of the things that I've said, I think I've said it on the podcast, is I'm so excited for the day where like my opinions are no longer relevant.
Yes.
And I get to update.
Yeah.
And just because, last year I said this thing and hopefully it wasn't problematic, but in 10 years, maybe a thing that I said was, I have said problematic things in the past. Right. And like, and I uncomfortably look forward to that day because it means that we have grown and I get a chance to update and grow. And I think that one of the things that I really love about Charlotte, and having been in classes with her and read her work and just having discussions with her, is she does do that. And I think she does it what looks like to me very seamlessly. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of effort for her behind it. And I'm sure, I don't want to discount all of the work that I'm sure she continues to do on herself. but I think it's just become a part of who she is and how she works to constantly, be taking in new information. And, I think one of the things that I really loved about this conversation is in speaking to her, she wasn't speaking to me as a student. She was speaking to me as a peer.
Yes.
And for someone who is relatively new to the industry to be speaking with someone who, like, as I say, quite literally wrote the books on it, and she's treating me as a peer, not as a student,
Yes.
it really felt to me like we are meeting here as equals. And you'll hear me like ask, what was it like for you then? And what's it like to have to do this now? And I really am keen to sort of gather that wisdom that she and that, our other sort of elder therapists, I don't know how people feel about that word, but like, I want that information because they know shit that I don't know.
Yeah.
And they're constantly updating, hopefully, too. And I'm excited for the day where I get to help people in that way and just kind of go, here's what I have learned. Like I've got people telling me, don't do this, set your boundaries really hard, da-da-da. If it weren't for some of these like really helpful industry elders, it would have been so much harder for me. So I'm really with you on this. But I also feel very lucky that individually, I don't know that I've come across too many sort of elder therapists who I feel like, oh, your views on something are problematic. And I don't know how I feel about taking other advice from you. I haven't encountered that yet.
Yeah. I haven't either. There's just an air about like, I don't know. I think there's something coming with like, we need to decolonize therapy that's like, everything we've been taught is wrong. But it's like, we can unlearn and hold the wisdom of what we've learned at the same time.
I like that.
And what you said about her treating you like a peer, like I know I have said this before, but one of my mentors, Bob Carty, I always felt that with him too. Like he had literally 40 years of experience on me and he always treated me and he will say, I keep learning from you because, I get excited about things and I'm like, ooh, this is a fun thing. Like here, let's talk about self-compassion or this or that. And he's like, you guide me to learn about things that maybe I forgot I wanted to like connect with. And I asked him before too, I was like, how do you do that? And he said, I offer the same me to everybody, right? I offer the same relationship, but not everybody is able to take advantage of that relationship or like not everybody meets me where I am offering. And
I really like that.
Yeah. And I mean, this is another thing too. I think this is important, like the honor, the grace that I try to extend to people who have had longer careers than I have feels so important. Like with Charlotte, I could hear you, I guess deferential is the word, right? You're deferring to her decades of experience. And there's something in the air that happens sometimes with younger generations where that deference isn't there. And I think that it's sort of a bottom-up way to try to balance the power. But it's like if a good mentor is offering you a relationship, they want it to be a positive balance of power. And so I don't mind. I don't mind like, putting my ego aside to be like, you know way more than I do. And I want to say that so that, younger therapists, it's like there's a balance of holding what you know and being proud of who you are, what you've created, what you do, and being deferential to somebody who has done it longer than you.
Yeah. I don't have any. There's no notes, nothing to disagree with there.
Yeah.
Just yes. And so, maybe now's a great time to introduce Charlotte Sills, who is a psychotherapist, coach, supervisor, and trainer in private practice in London and on the teaching faculty of Metanoia Institute, where I went to school, and Ashridge Hult Business School, UK. Also professor of coaching at Ashridge and on the steering committee of the International Association of Relational Transactional Analysis. She has published widely in the field of therapy and coaching. And you can hear me smile about that because you'll hear me talk about how many books Charlotte has been a part of in this episode. So please enjoy my conversation with Charlotte Sills.
Are you a therapist stepping into a leadership role for the first time? Or maybe you've been in a leadership position for a while, but you're bumping up against new struggles. It's a transformative journey and one that can be deeply rewarding, but also filled with unique challenges. Many therapists find themselves in leadership positions because of their exceptional therapeutic skills. Yet leading, supervising, or managing others requires a whole new set of competencies not typically covered in graduate school. Our Authentic Leaders group is here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. We believe that the journey is best undertaken with the guidance of experienced mentors alongside fellow learners. The next cohort of Authentic Leaders will run November 2024 through June 2025, meeting once monthly on Fridays for 90 minutes. We'll also have some additional opportunities for connection and support along the way. Join me in this journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group.
Charlotte Sills, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Thank you.
So I'm excited to have you here. So for our listeners, Charlotte is many things, and she can tell us all about that in a second. But I know Charlotte from my own therapy training. You were a guest tutor in some of my classes, although I think for American listeners, tutor is a bit of an understatement. So we would still call you a professor in the States. Can you introduce us to yourself and tell us all of the things that you do?
Sure. Although I'd like to start by saying it was a huge pleasure to meet you when I taught your group at Metanoia. You were a pleasure, and I was very impressed with your presentation on trauma in organizations and the slides you made and everything. I thought,
Oh, thank you.
as an interesting woman, I thought.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So I am Charlotte Sills. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice and a supervisor and trainer of counselors and psychotherapists and supervisors. I am a professor. I'm professor of coaching at Ashridge Business School.
Cool.
Where I teach on their coaching programs and their organizational supervision programs. And I am a writer, a bit.
I think that's an understatement.
A wife and a mother and a grandmother.
Lovely. And when I say it's an understatement, I think, Charlotte, how many books have you written or edited?
I don't know.
There's at least 10 on my shelf.
Are there? Oh, how lovely. Yes. About 10, I think. There's some are second editions, which is a bit of a chisel.
When I interviewed Eugene Ellis, I told him that his book was one of the most cited books that I used in writing during my master's degree. But I think you might be the most cited author just by the sheer amount of textbooks that you've been a part of.
My friend Helena Hagedorn, with whom I did write a book actually about relational transactional analysis. I like that book. But Helena refers to herself and me as a theory tart. Now, I don't know if your American listeners will know what a tart is, will they?
I think so, yeah.
A theory tart. So just loving different approaches and the differences and how they complement each other and whether you can integrate them and so on. So I have written in various fields.
Yeah. And if I can ask, how long have you been working in this industry?
About 40 years.
Wow.
Shall I talk a bit about how I started?
Yeah, I would love to hear it.
It's a little bit relevant. You've called it the Wounded Healer and invited us, which I thought was interesting, invited us to think about what events and experiences of our childhoods and our pasts shaped us becoming practitioners. And when I was quite young, in my 20s, and my children were young, but just beginning to start, I think my daughter was starting nursery school, so she must have been about 5. And my son was at preschool or play school, we call it here. And I was thinking that I was going to have some time, because before I'd had kids and got married and everything, I was a French teacher and I knew I didn't want to go back to that. And I had some time and I thought, well, I wondered if there was something I could do with it. And one day I was sitting watching television and there was an advertisement. There was somebody talking about a bereavement project, a bereavement service that was starting up. locally to me, where I live in West London, looking for volunteer bereavement counsellors. And I thought immediately, oh, I could do that. And it was the first time I'd ever thought of going into counselling or therapy, anything like that. I thought, I know exactly what bereavement feels like. Well, I didn't think I know exactly what bereavement feels like. I did think, oh, I could do that. I could do that. I would like to do that. I'd be good at that. So I think that was the beginning. And it was years later that I thought, wonder what link that has to my past. And of course, my past was littered with endings and losses and feared losses and all that sort of thing, which I think made me attuned to bereavement.
So do you think when you started that first kind of volunteer position, were you making the connections then
No.
about no?
No, I just thought I could do that.
Yeah.
And I want to. I could be there to support people. I know what hell it is for them. And yes, it was years before I thought actually there was some link to me,
And how did you end up doing a formal training then?
Well, I started off as a bereavement counsellor. Those were people, we visited people in their homes, people who'd asked for a counsellor, and just gave them someone to talk to. And then the person who was running the project, first of all, then I did a counselling course, a bereavement counselling course, and then a general counselling course. Then the person who was running that project retired, and I was given the job. I ran the project till for a few years, till 1986, I think, or 87, by which time I had also trained as a psychotherapist, qualified as a therapist, and started working at Metanoia way back then.
So as someone who's been working in the industry as a therapist and as a teacher for so long, what have you seen that's changed? And what have you seen that hasn't changed that you wish would have changed?
Cool. That's an interesting question. What have I seen has changed in the practice of psychotherapy, and what hasn't changed? Well, you mentioned Eugene Ellis. One of the things that has been very slow to change, really, is for people to be more aware and more versed in the implications of race and racial trauma in psychotherapy, and the implications of cross-racial dyads and all that. There hasn't been nothing. For example, TA World, Valerie Batts did some brilliant work back in the 80s and 90s, looking at target and non-target groups, which is intersectionality, I suppose, by another name. So there hasn't been nothing, but it's really only fairly recently that there's been concerted effort to make that change. Of psychotherapy generally, I would have to say it's the development of a relational approach. And by relational, I mean recognizing that there are two subjectivities in the room, that we both bring ourselves, our past, our patterns, and so on. And we then, as relational practitioners, are interested in what we co-create as the two subjectivities meet. How we bring our old patterns, and in TA we'd talk about games or enactments. In psychoanalysis, they'd talk about enactments. That our old patterns of being, how we bring them into the relationship, and whether we can create something new. And with the program you did, the humanistic program, I think it's a really great blend of approaches. You looked at Gestalt, TA, and person-centered. And person-centered has always been, the humanistic approaches have always really valued the relationship and seen it as key to healing. That being in a relationship with another, an authentic relationship. There's a fabulous quote by Martin Buber that says, when two people meet humanly and authentically, God is the electricity that passes between them. It's rather wonderful, isn't it? God, as it were, out there, but somehow we know what Martin Buber meant. So the person-centered offers that sort of the invitation to an authentic human meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The TA provides fantastic ways of recognizing and seeing how we get in our way of meeting authentically with our past patterns and our scripts and our games. And then the Gestalt has all its wonderful methodology for meeting, co-creating something new in the moment. So I think the three is a wonderful blend.
I really wish someone would have explained it just like that to me. Because to me, that's the best way of explaining it. And I think in therapy school, I spent the first, 2 years going like, these are all different. Like we didn't get enough kind of, here's what role this fills, here's what role this fills. And that's part of the integrational aspect of it, because the different parts of it fill different things for different people. But I think what you just said is a really sort of concise way of looking at how those theories are focused.
And complement each other.
Yeah.
Mm, yeah.
And you talked about relational therapy. And, for me as like a baby therapist, it's so important. Part of the reason that I love this work is because I can bring my whole self into the room and I don't have to hide. Of course, we're not here to talk about my stuff, but I don't have to hide my personality or my reactions to things. And in fact, that's what a lot of my clients tell me has been one of the sort of agents of change for them, is to see my reactions. And I'm curious, as that's changed over time. So if you didn't necessarily get trained, or if it wasn't as ingrained in the profession when you started, how have you had to adapt over time as it's become more relational?
Well, interestingly, I think I did get trained relationally. Have you heard of Patricia Clarkson? She was one of, and probably the most visionary of the founders, the three founders of Metanoia Institute. Patricia Clarkson, Sue Fish, and Brian Dobson founded it, and then they were joined by their colleague Maria Gilbert years later. And Patricia worked relationally and taught us relational psychotherapy. It wasn't called that then, but we were trained relationally, I think. And then the relational movement grew in the 90s. There's an interesting book, you might already have it. It's edited by Bill Cornell and Helena Hagedorn, and it traces the roots of a relationality in transactional analysis from the 80s, a few articles in the 80s that were written looking at what gets co-created in the therapy room and how that's developed and grown up until now. And I have to say, it's interesting. Back in the 80s, we did a lot of abreaction, a bit of catharsis, expression of feelings and getting angry and making redecisions and all that sort of thing. It was more of a one person or 1.5 person psychotherapy. I wonder if everybody's familiar with Martha Stark.
Probably not everyone who's listening.
1999, Martha Stark, Modes of Therapeutic Action, if people are interested. She looks at one-person psychotherapy, which is where the problem is located in the individual, and you help the individual find their issues and core beliefs and patterns and recognize that in themselves and heal them. 1.5 person, which really focuses on what we were talking about earlier, the importance of the authentic relationship and offering a corrective experience in a new relationship with a client. And 2 person is the 2 subjectivities in the room. So back in the 80s, mainly we did do 1 and 1.5 person therapy. We did reparenting, for example. I mean, I didn't particularly, but that was something that was about. And lots of redecision and so on. And then the whole profession moved away from that sort of therapy into a quiet, reflective, introspective, exploring therapy and a relational therapy and working in the transference and what's happening here. And in recent years, I've seen going back sometimes to some of those wonderful things of the 80s like in sensory motor psychotherapy or somatic experiencing. It's recognizing that if people have a trauma, if they're traumatized, then they're bringing that sore spot, that lesion, into every encounter. And saying we are co-creating this thing between us is actually minimizing or ignoring a profound trauma for somebody that they're going to be triggered wherever they are. And it is important to recognize that that's their trauma trigger. It's the definition of a trauma, as your listeners probably know, or an easy definition of it, is that we are so reminded of an old terrible experience that it feels as if it's happening now. There's no narrative. That happened then and that was awful, and this is reminding me of it. This has triggered me, so I've switched off my capacity to tell a story about it, and it's happening now. Where we have to help people, we have to go back to more of a one person and 1.5 person approach, I think, in order to help people manage that and recognize that is their trauma, and help them regulate themselves and so on, and be in a different relationship before we work purely relationally, I think. Sorry, this is probably more than you wanted to hear.
No, this is great. I love this. What I'm really struck by in that is, again, because I'm at the very beginning of my therapy career. And so I haven't been able to see the sort of ebbs and flows and changes that happen in this sort of industry and in the profession. And what I'm kind of hearing from you is what you've seen as some of those changes and those ebbs and flows. And I'm curious what it's like to have to stay relevant and to have to stay updated, not necessarily with like what's the trending topic, but to keep yourself updated, right? Like after therapy school ends, our personal work doesn't end, and we have to continue doing that. But I'm guessing also be humble enough to know that, oh, we're going to have to just keep doing this in order to continue being able to effectively work. And yeah, I'm really curious what your experience with that has been, and that change and adaptation over time.
Well, all I can say is I agree with you. We do continue to do our own personal work, firstly because that journey is ongoing, and it's ongoing because we are ongoing. Our life stages pass by, and they bring up different challenges for us and evoke different things. And then we get to the age that our parents were when they die and so on. So there's always things to relate to in our lives. And we never finish that journey. And I also think it's an ethical obligation of therapists to do their own personal work, particularly if they're going to work relationally, actually. Because if we're going to bring ourselves and all of ourselves in the way you so eloquently said, you bring all of yourself, not to talk about yourself, but to really bring whatever's being evoked for you, not necessarily even say it, but to be aware of it and notice it and so on. Then we also need to be extremely good at saying, aha, yes, that's my script, that's my pattern. I'm projecting onto my client or whatever it may be. We do have to. And then developments in neuroscience, development in, I don't know, understanding child development, all those sorts of things, throw up challenges for us to say, we have to pay attention to this, like trauma, like realizing that a trauma trigger there's no point in, well, anyway, I've said it already.
I'm thinking about and I don't know if you're going to be comfortable with this, so feel free to tell me no, but I'm really curious what it's like to age as a therapist.
Age? Me? Can't think what it's like to age as a therapist. It's interesting. Well, there was a time that I got a lot of maternal transferences.
Okay.
And now I sometimes get grand maternal transferences. People see me as their usually loving, actually. I was going to say it could be a fierce and critical grandmother, but no, I think they tend to see me as their loving grandmother, which I have to say I quite like. It's rather nice to allow myself to love my clients and for them to feel that's all right. I don't have to analyze it and decide that it's all transferential and everything.
So it sounds like you've kind of relaxed into that role.
I suppose it does. I mean, it's not something I completely have thought about before, but I think in a way I have. I do think maybe I've gone a little bit full circle
Mm.
back to what we were saying earlier on in our talk about the importance of an authentic relationship. And I think if you let yourself be, if I call on my best self, so I'm here and I'm present and I'm meeting with my client, then there is love. And I don't talk about love and I don't say love, but I can't help that being there, I think.
I really like that. That's something that I resonate with. You know, there's some clients I have and they walk out the door and I'm just like, oh, I just love you so much. And some people evoke that type of response in me. But I think there's something, that quote that you had from Martin Buber about that, the two people meeting and God being that thing that's in between. I would call that love. I think when two people meet authentically and allow that space to be filled with something, when you're meeting someone authentically, it's really hard to fill that space with hate or dislike. It's not to say that you can't dislike, your clients or dislike somebody that you do meet, but when you stare into the humanity of another person, it's so hard to find anything else except love, I think.
What a beautiful way of putting it. Yes. I'm thinking of Joan Wilmot and Robin Sherritt. The only times I've heard them be annoyed with people is that they say, he won't let me love him. Or is it he won't let himself love me? I can't remember, but it's absolutely. And then we're back to the relational thing, of course. Then if you're meeting, if we think that the healing comes from allowing that to flower in the present, in the here and now, then working relationally would be to be interested in all the ways that we are both stopping ourselves really meeting. How are you stopping yourself really meeting me? And how am I stopping myself?
I really like that. Like, what are the barriers to love? And sort of on that track of healing, how do you feel about the term healer?
Well, it's funny. I mean, I'm interested that you're asking the question. That implies that some people don't like the word healer. And
I don't like it personally.
Well, I would have said I didn't like it. There was an issue of the Transactional Analysis Journal on cure. And we had this was back in the 80s, we had long debates about cure and what it meant, and it implied somebody's sick and has got to be cured. It was sort of very medical model. So I do feel I'm interested that you do as well, a bit not so sure about the word healing. But if we settle for healing would be allowing the wounds of the past to stop getting in the way of what you just described about being there. That would be quite a good definition. What's your objection to the word healer?
I don't like it as applied to myself because for me, it implies a power imbalance. I have something that you don't, and I am using that mysterious something to enact something in you. And I don't think that's what I'm doing as a therapist. I think that person, it's a very, if we're talking TA terms, the ones that still are in my brain, it's a very much, I'm okay, you're okay. And sometimes even not you're okay, I'm not okay, but just, you know yourself better than I do. And, what I tell my clients is I view my role as a facilitator of the exploration of your experience. I don't have any secret powers or healing capabilities that you don't already have. And so for me, I think there's healing that happens in the room, but I don't think that I'm the one doing it.
Beautiful.
That's my objection to it.
Very nice. I like that a lot. So you're the facilitator of a person's exploration and self-healing.
Yeah.
Healing happens. And the fact that you're in relationship with them, I'm sure, is part of the the healing. I really do think that change happens in relationship.
Mm.
So healing happens, but as you say, it's not your magic wand. It's not us who do something. It's the medical model again, isn't it?
Mm.
So do you actually say that to your clients?
Mhm.
I'm here to facilitate your exploration of yourself and your life. And
Yeah, that's
um,
almost verbatim what I say, because
very nice.
I think it's important. It balances power from the start. And that's very, very much something that's important to me is how do we balance power in this space?
Yes, that's really important, isn't it? Because
Mm.
so much of our clients and our own challenges in the world and difficulties and stuck patterns and hang-ups are as a result of the negotiation of power.
Mm.
Power and love, probably. Power and care.
Mm.
So very important to address that, to have an awareness.
Mm.
Thinking of a friend and beautiful man, a friend of mine called Jochen Enke.
Mm.
And he was a psychotherapist and a supervisor and trained, interestingly, at Chiron, which is the wounded healer.
Oh.
Or I think some people might pronounce it Chiron. Anyway, he has worked for many a long year. And a while ago, he stopped calling himself a psychotherapist for all the reasons that you were describing. He
Mm.
said, I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not here to change people or make people better. He offers conversations.
Mm.
And people come and they pay him for a conversation. And he is a wonderful healer.
Mm.
But just conversations. And they say, sometimes they say, apparently, but if we're just having conversations, why am I paying?
Mm.
And he says, you're paying me so that I can be free to do what I love.
Man, I would love to have the absolute courage to say something like that.
Yes.
What a thing.
Yes.
What a thing. Okay, so you view him as a healer.
I suppose I did just use the word.
Yeah.
Yes. But he's not trying to be a healer.
Yeah.
He's just offering conversations.
So what do you think is different to what he's doing and what you're doing that would kind of make you feel iffy about the word healer?
Gosh, what an interesting question. I think his healing is about him allowing himself to be absolutely, fully who he is,
Mm.
without getting in his own way with his personality or his ego or his this, that, or the other. And I think that is healing. And so maybe it's humility that would stop me saying that I'm a healer, because I don't
Mm.
feel that I'm there. Sounds as if I'm
Mm.
idolizing this bloke, which I'm not.
Well, it sounds like you admire the work that he does.
I really do. I really do. Yes.
And it's interesting to think about the idea of, and I think, there are other people that I would go, oh yeah, they're definitely a healer, right? Or the work that they've done has been very healing to me. And I think you're one of those people, actually, that I would say, there are times where you came into our class and you said, after, 40 years in the industry, I still XYZ. And for me, who has a be perfect driver and a be good driver, to hear somebody say that, who's got all of the experience and is literally writing the books on it, to go, oh yeah, I still mess up all the time, is so healing for me.
Oh, good.
And so it's interesting to hear you talk about somebody that you would apply that term to, but not necessarily take it on for yourself, when you're probably somebody that I would apply it to.
That's very touching.
So just kind of in that, how do you feel about the phrase wounded healer?
Well, if we're accepting the word healer, then the word wounded healer makes perfect sense. I
Mm-hmm.
think if we didn't have wounds and hang-ups and experiences of our own, we wouldn't be able to understand our clients.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And equally, if we waited, if I have a criticism of Carl Rogers and the person-centered approach, he says that his 6 conditions are the necessary and sufficient. The 6 conditions about making contact and so on and so forth. And the 3 core conditions is that the therapist offers empathy, congruence, real authenticity, and real unconditional positive regard. If we could all do that from day one, that would be fine. But if you waited until you were perfect enough to be able to offer those 3 things all the time, you'd never become a therapist. Nobody would ever be able to be a therapist because we're not perfect, and we're riddled with bits and pieces, as Irina used to say.
It's so funny because the critiques that I hear, and I'm not a particular fan of, like, Carl Rogers is there and he's fine and great. I'm not like a big defender of him, but it's always interesting to hear the things that British people critique about Carl Rogers because they're very different to what I've heard Americans critique him on. And I heard it was in the Counseling Tutor podcast. I don't know if you've heard that. They're 2 British guys, and they said, yeah, empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard are great for a guy from the Midwest in the United States who didn't grow up with war and who grew up with a general Midwestern sensibility. And I'm also from the Midwest. And so when I read the core conditions, I was like, this is just how I am. Like, I don't know why we have to be told how to be this way. This is just how I am. And then I realized that he had just kind of repackaged the Midwestern values into theory. So for me, that's actually what anchored me to that theory. And it doesn't feel like it never felt like something I had to strive for. And not to say that I do it perfectly or do it right all the time, but it's ingrained in my nature. And what the guys on the Counseling Tutor podcast said was like, what British person who grew up in the 1940s, which is when Carl Rogers grew up, is going to have that? Like, they grew up during a war, and with the war happening in front of them, and with the sort of stiff upper lip and all of that happening at the time. And I don't necessarily mean that that's what carries through today, but it is just interesting because the things that I pick up on for him is that he's way too, like, the Gloria videos, I think he's real creepy. Like, he's way too close. And
yes, sort
so
of paternal and
yeah, and that to me that's my big sort of Carl Rogers critique is like, oh.
Oh, that's very interesting. You see, I'm interested that the guys said anyone who was brought up in the war. Oh, it's a very good point that I hadn't particularly thought about. I think it's more anyone who has got a persona, a personality, an identity that we want to protect. I want to be seen as like this and like that, and I would never do this, and I would always be like that, and so on, and protect ourselves from shame or being caught out or whatever it may be. It's really hard to be truly authentic, truly congruent, empathic all the time, even when the person's being a complete pain in the ass, and unconditionally positive regarding, even when their values are different from ours. I don't know. I think it's a tall order. And I'm interested that you're saying that they were the values of the Midwest.
That's a generalization, but we're just friendly people.
Where did you I want to make sure that I know where the Midwest is? It
so it's kind of that sort of like middle region where lots of corn grows. So I was born in Ohio,
right?
And my home is Chicago. So, but it stretches all the way out to Nebraska and Kansas if you're looking at a map. So, and that's,
all the middle bit, all the
yeah, just that sort of circle in the middle. And it's interesting to me that I never would have thought to critique that because it was when I heard them critique it, that was the first time that I was almost invited to look at that for myself. And, kind of hearing you speak about it, again, it's not something that I have perfect 100% of the time, but it doesn't feel like it takes too much effort for me. So I don't know, maybe to be continued on that, I suppose. Like that, maybe that's something for me that'll evolve or that I'll find more out about myself. But yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. And we're sort of circling around to where we were both agreeing that if we meet each other authentically,
Yeah.
love is there.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering now, I did visit that part of the States, and we went to Chicago. I went with some friends, and everybody was incredibly nice to us. Really, very, very nice to us.
It's a source of pride that anytime someone says, I went to Chicago and everybody was really nice to me, it makes me feel so happy. And I've never had anyone say anything different. So that day is probably going to just destroy me. But I really like that sort of just coming back to that idea of love sort of being in that space.
But going back to your thing about the wounded healer,
Yeah.
I think my point is that if we waited to have all our wounds healed and be all perfectly glowy, then none of us would get on with the work. So we're bound to be wounded.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think that that's something that took me a long time in therapy school to learn as well. So,
well, if you have a perfect driver, then it's a hard thing to let go of.
Sure is. Sure, it's hard to let go of. I think maybe I want to close. So this is something that I'm a bit obsessed with recently in general. When I meet someone who is experienced in something that I'm curious about or interested in, or in a profession that I'm in, I'm always curious to hear what you hope for the sort of next generation of therapists. What do you hope?
So the next generation of therapists, that's you and your colleagues.
Yeah, and anyone who comes after us.
I hope they can be part of a movement for themselves and for their clients and for the community, a movement that will move away from consumerism, hyper-individuality, destroying the planet, disconnection with nature, and all those things, and can be part of helping people be in the sorts of relationships you and I were talking about. And I do have some hope. My grandchildren, who are all in their teens, they're absolutely, I was going to say they're passionate about, they're casually passionate. They expect everybody and they expect their friends to be passionate about not eating meat, caring for the planet, worrying too much. I feel for them, actually. I think it's really hard to be young now and be anxious about the future. And equality in terms of race and gender and all that sort of thing, they are really different. So I'm hoping that they will also be the therapists of the future and the clients of the future and so on. It's an interesting question. What's your hope for therapists of the future?
Probably not too far. Oh, see, I asked the question I didn't think about how I would answer it. I think probably something similar, that we can be a positive source of change in that same sort of space of helping us as a society move out of a lot of the societal problems that we currently find ourselves in. So all of the isms and the climate change and everything. And I think, therapy is activism. And I hope that as your grandchildren's generation become therapists, that sort of just becomes even bolder. And I love what you just said about the sort of casual passion, because I see that as well, where it's just kind of like they're not like, oh, is it okay if or they assume that you are going to be fine with, or that agree that, yep, the planet's on fire, or that, yep, we support trans people. And I love that. And I hope that, as you were saying, the things that have been slow to change speed up. I hope that the therapy profession catches up with society and with the younger generations of people, because I think they know more than we do.
Yes, how lovely. Maybe we're hoping that therapists will go out of business.
I say that. I tell people I'm in the business of making myself unemployed.
That's great. Apparently Carl Jung, his grandson, said to him, what did people do before they had analysts? They must have been talking about psychoanalysis being the new profession. And apparently Jung said they had friends.
Yeah. Oh, I like that. Well, Charlotte, I really appreciate you coming on today. If people want to find your work, where is a good place for them to find that?
My work, do you mean things that I've written?
Yeah, where can they find out more about you?
I suppose, I'm afraid you said my social media tags and everything. I'm not on Instagram, I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on
That's
Facebook.
healthy.
I don't have a website.
This blows my mind, actually, because my website is something that most of my clients are like, the only reason I picked you is because you had a website. And my supervisor doesn't have one either. And I'm jealous. It's the only word that I've got for it.
Those were the days when we didn't have that sort of thing. So, but I guess if people Google me, they'll see things I've written, and they might even see a YouTube video or something if they wanted to.
Yes, that is true. I have Googled you, and indeed, plenty of stuff comes up. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I was a bit nervous and thought, oh dear, I won't be able to think of anything to say. And you've made me feel so relaxed. I've been talking nonstop.
No, I love it. Well, I'm glad. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye.